Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming the son of the father of rock and roll himself, Bill Haley. Bill Haley Jr. is coming on the show today. It's the 65th anniversary of his father's timeless, landmark, seminal hit single, Rock Around the Clock, was released in 1955, and it was the first rock record ever to hit number one. He had the first rock record ever to hit the top 20 shortly before that, called Crazy Crazy Man. And his father had some more hits: See You Later Alligator, Shake, Rattle, and Roll, Hot Dog Buddy Buddy, a lot of great songs. I'm having Bill Jr. on the show today to talk about his life, career, and legacy, and he has a book out called Crazy Crazy Man, the Bill Haley story, and it's going to be great to talk to him. I feel so honored. So, here is my interview with Bill Haley Jr. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Tommy.
Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Pretty good. Coming off of 4th of July weekend. Did you have a nice 4th of July?
Yes, very nice. Thanks.
Nice. This is such a great honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
Sure. My pleasure.
So, going back in time, you were Bill Haley's second son, but first with his second wife. Was he already getting successful when you were born?
Actually, the month I was born, which was July of 1955, his recording of Rock Around the Clock had just become the very first number one record in the genre that would come to be called rock and roll. Actually, we released, they didn't know what to call it, so we characterized it as a foxtrot with vocal chorus. But there's quite a story behind that song. That song was actually recorded in 1954, and it was released but didn't do much. Mm-hmm. A year later, it was used on the soundtrack of a movie called The Blackboard Jungle, about juvenile royalty. And when it appeared on the opening credits, it just took off like a rocket. The kids left the theater and requested it at the radio stations and bought the record, and became the first number one record in rock and roll. So yeah, that's when I was born, right at the height of my father's popularity.
Wow, so you were born right there in the middle of all that insanity.
Correct, yep.
Wow. Was he on the road?
I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. Was he on the road a lot when you were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. And, I don't, Tommy, you and I haven't spoken, so I don't even know if you're aware. I wrote a biography of my father, which came out last year.
Yes.
It's called Crazy Man Crazy, the Bill Haley story. So I document all this in that book. But part of the story, of course, is my father's incredible professional life. I mean, the milestones, getting down the barriers of racial animosity, prejudice, and so on and so forth. Great, interesting story, but also about his private life. He was a very personal guy. Also kind of a tragic figure. He fell into alcoholism, and his marriage to my mother crumbled, and basically there's no way to sugarcoat it. He abandoned our family. So the fact that he was on the road constantly, which is your question, really contributed to that outcome and some of the issues he faced. It's very difficult, and I know that that many successful musicians have managed to have a great family life. It comes down to personal choices, but I guess in my father's defense, I'll just say that he was really real rock and roll superstar, and by being the first, he also was the shield, so to speak, the spokesperson, the defender of the music, the critics, and so that took its toll on him. And I think, once again, as you mentioned, being on the road all the time, I think made it very difficult for him to maintain family life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, show business is not easy. It's a very selfish kind of a business, and a lot of people around you suffer from it, when you're in
Sure.
it, especially when you're super successful, you know. Um, I know that you've worked in the magazine business and you've toured with your version of the Comets, but growing up, did you have any musical aspirations that he instilled in you?
Only genetically, because he wasn't an influence on me as a father figure.
Mm-hmm.
I did, and I go into this in the book too. I did get to know him the last few years of his life, but at that point he had really deteriorated mentally into his alcoholism, and it was very hard to build and maintain any kind of relationship. So, but the fact that music is in my blood, I guess, because I always had this desire, and I did pick up a guitar as a teenager and taught myself to play, and I kind of maintained that throughout my life, but I never had aspirations to do it professionally for a lot of reasons. Some personal, I guess, and some just life took me in other directions, kind of thing. So I kind of avoided that my whole life, but I always liked to play for fun, play with friends, parties and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I also avoided giving interviews and getting involved in tributes to my father and that kind of thing for very long, because I was working through my own personal issues with my father. But at a certain point, I'm going to say about 10, 12 years ago, I kind of let go of all that. And things just kind of opened up for me, and opportunities opened up where I finally decided, why not? I'm not going to live forever. Why not seize this opportunity, which basically the opportunity was a booking agent offering me the opportunity to get some dates and tour a bit if I could put a band together to do my father's music on a high level. So I took that challenge, I did that, and we've been working ever since, with obviously with the exception of the last 3-4 months with the COVID situation where all musicians are kind of on standby. But yeah, we got a tour of New Zealand out of it, and travel all over the States, and I get to go over and perform in the UK from time to time. And hopefully I'll be over there this January in Reading, the Blockers reunion in Reading in January.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's awesome. Wow. So, yeah, his parents were musical, right?
That's correct. Yeah, his mom was a pianist and organist. She played organ at the church, but I think she was trained or took lessons at least as a child. And they had a piano in the house, so she always played at her church. And my grandfather played the banjo and the mandolin, and he obviously was a big influence on my dad. And they bought him his first guitar as a teenager, and they encouraged him. And so, yeah, he grew up in a musical family, and that was always a part of their social gatherings, particularly back, as you can imagine, in the 1930s and 40s. There wasn't much, we didn't have a million things to do and a million diversions and social media and so on and so forth. So sitting around playing music together was a great way to pass the time, and that's the way my dad grew up.
Mm-hmm. And your grandparents, they were from the South, but he was born in Detroit and raised in Philly. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, my grandmother was born in England, and she came over with her parents when she was a young teenager. Mm-hmm. My father's father was born in Kentucky, and he moved to Detroit, and that's where my father was born. Actually, Highland Park, Michigan, which is, I guess, a suburb of Detroit. And he was a mechanic, and I think he may have even worked for the Ford Motor Company at some point. But when the Great Depression hit in the early 30s, he lost his job. And my grandmother, who grew up in England, her parents were back in Pennsylvania and worked for the Sun Oil Company, or the American Viscose Company, which was a subsidiary of Sun Oil. It was at the British Petroleum Company. So my grandfather was able to get a job with them. That's why they moved east in 1932. So my father, at the age of 7, moved to Pennsylvania. So he grew up in Pennsylvania and basically even as a professional, he kept his office and his headquarters of the band in Chester, Pennsylvania, up until 1962, when things just totally fell apart. And he moved to Mexico, and that was the end of that.
Wow. And something interesting I read, too, he came up with his trademark kiss curl because when he was 4, he had a severed optic nerve that led to him being blind in his left eye.
Well, yeah, that's how it started, but he didn't put a curl on it right away, obviously. But he was self-conscious about being blind in his left eye. And so one of the ways that he was able to distract attention from that eye was to wear a cowboy hat and become a singing cowboy. And that really kind of, it combined with his love of music and his interest in the singing cowboys, Gene Autry, and the movie cowboys of the day. He decided he was going to become a singing cowboy. So he started wearing a hat. And that worked for a while. But then, if you know the story of the band, my father's various bands, he was what they called a hillbilly and western artist, basically what would become country music.
Right.
But at a certain point, he started experimenting. He and 2 of his musical partners started experimenting, playing what was then called race music. We call it rhythm and blues now. And the band evolving, and at a certain point, they made the decision to get out of the cowboy outfits. And so when my father got rid of the cowboy hat, now he had a dilemma: how we going to distract attention from that eye? And he had a natural cowlick on his forehead. So his solution was to make that cowlick into a curl, a kiss curl with pomade, and that did the trick. So first it was the hat that was the distraction, and then it was the curl.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 'cause I remember my father, when I was a kid, he had a greatest hits album of your father, and on the cover, the kiss curl was a little understated. I didn't really notice it for a long time, and then when I started seeing pictures of him through the years and stuff, he always had that curl, and I always wondered where that came from and why he had it,
Yeah. Well, I think once he did it, he's kind of stuck with it. I know I saw one interview he did in South America where he was asked about the curl, and his response was that, Clark Gable has his ears, Jimmy Durante has his nose.
Yeah.
I have my curl. That's our trademark.
Yeah. That's a great way of saying it. Yeah. And I know that before he took off and stuff, he was at a radio station in Philly for a long time, right?
Yeah, it was actually Chester, Pennsylvania. It was WPWA. And actually, he had been on several radio stations prior to that as kind of an itinerant singing cowboy / radio host, and kind of bounced around a lot from job to job. But a new radio station started in Chester in 1947, WPWA, and having grown up nearby, his parents heard about it, and they told him, so he came back home and applied to the job of basically program director, and he hosted the ladies auxiliary program, and he did all kinds of jobs at the radio station in addition to being singing cowboy on the air, put a house band together. But he was a regular disc jockey in WPWA from 1947 up until about 1953, when the band just started getting too popular and he couldn't do it anymore.
And his band at first was called the Saddlemen, but he changed it to Bill Haley and his Comets as a wordplay on Haley's Comet. Yeah,
that kind of that was a suggestion of a fellow disc jockey at the radio station who suggested that, and he had a shrewd. Well, I say shrewd, but that's a matter of opinion because he made some pretty boneheaded decisions as well. But a manager who got involved early on, who encouraged that. And at the same time, they changed the name. That's when they got rid of the cowboy hats and started with suits and ties and eventually tuxes. Changed their image. So yeah, they were trying to be kind of a, and they weren't a novel to bands. I mean, we take it for granted now, the kind of music they play, but at the time, I mean, my father wrote a song called "Crazy Man Crazy" in 1953.
Right.
And that was around the time when they changed the name to Comets and changed the outfits. But that song became a national hit record. It went to number 13 on Billboard and like 12 in Cashbox, something like that. But at that time, country was the song from the Moulin Rouge by Percy Faith and his orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 was How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? So this alley world. So music was strange and different, and so yeah, I think they took the names of comets to be kind of futuristic and space age, and of course it fit very well with Halley's comet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just heard Crazy Crazy Man the other day. I wasn't too familiar with that song like I was with his other hits. And yeah, I was reading that was like the first rock record to hit the top 20. And also, too, he also covered Rocket 88, which a lot of people credit that to being the first rock record. And Ike Turner played on the original version.
Yeah, that's correct. So the original version was actually written by Ike's baritone sax player, Jackie Branston. He was just a band member when he wrote the tune, and they recorded it. And actually, the producer of that record was none other than Sam Phillips. This was a year before he created Sun Records. And as a matter of fact, the money he made from this record, he leased it to Chess, the Chess label out of Chicago. That's where he got the money to start Sun Studios. But song Rocket 88 was written by Jackie Branston, recorded by Ike Turner's band, but they actually called themselves on this record Jackie Branston and his Delta Cats. So Sam Phillips cut the record, released it, or sold it, or released it actually to the Chess label, and it was a hit in the race records markets. Okay, so back in those days, particularly in the South, black records could only be bought in black record stores, and so that the Chess Records sales rep was in Virginia, and he was in a diner, and he was complaining to this guy from Philadelphia who was just starting a record label up in Philadelphia. His name was Dave Miller. And this Chess guy was saying, it's a darn pity I have this record. It's a big hit down here in the race markets, but I can't get it in the white record stores. He goes, and if you could find a white artist to cover this record, you probably have a hit. And the record, of course, was Rocket 88, and the guy he bumped into, Dave Miller, went back to Philadelphia and made some phone calls, and somebody said, well, Bill Haley over at the Twin Bars in Gloucester, he's covering black music. He's a white hillbilly artist. So Dave Miller went over there and asked him if he would make a record. He'd pay him $25, and he'd pay his side man $15. And my dad was reluctant to do it because even though he was covering race records or black tunes, as a hillbilly artist, he didn't, as a live act, he was doing that regularly at the Twin Bars, but he was reluctant to record it because of the, it was a taboo thing to do. He didn't want to alienate his hillbilly followers, but he did. So that was the spring of 1951. And if you define rock and roll as the merging of, rhythm and blues or race music and hillbilly and western or country music, that's the first example of it on record. Story for that time.
Yeah.
And of course, a couple of years later, my dad wrote the tune "Crazy and Crazy," and just as a way to get kids to dance. And that's all they were trying to do when they formed this band, the Saddlemen, and this grand experiment where they were gonna listen to Count Basie records and other African American tunes and see if they could merge some of what they're doing with the country thing they were doing and get kids dancing. The big bands were going, and they wanted to get kids dancing. So that was the whole goal and the purpose of these musical experiments over a period of 3 or 4 years that culminated with the recording of Rock Around the Clock and Shake, Rattle, and Roll and See You Later, Alligator. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, almost immediately, after Rock Around the Clock was a hit, many other artists around the country, kind of were doing the same thing. Elvis and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and so on and so forth. So these forces of race music or rhythm and blues and country music or hillbilly music, they were crashing into each other all over the place. My dad just kind of was about 3 or 4 years ahead of everybody else in recognizing it and then kind of cultivating a sound that would sell hit records. And he did. He sold probably 10 million records in 1950, from mid-54 to mid-56. So,
wow.
So it worked. But it was an experiment, and it was, there was a lot of hits and misses along the way. I mean, some of my favorite records are those early records in 1952, 53, where they were looking for the sound, and you could really see the wheels turning in terms of trying to find the right combination. But it was all about getting kids to dance, basically. It wasn't anything more complicated than that.
Yeah, I remember your father had a very funny quote. He said, "Everybody hates us except the kids."
Yeah. It's true. It's true. And we kind of dismiss it now, but there was a lot of disdain from all over. So, obviously from segregationists and racists, because you were encouraging race mixing with the music, but also from the musical purists and snobs and of the world who thought rock and roll was just cretinous music for cavemen, destroying culture. I mean, there was a lot of opposition to this, but gradually, I think most people realized it wasn't going away, and here we are, 65 years later. I guess there's still a semblance of rock and roll out there.
Mm-hmm. His producer, Dave Miller, he hated Rock Around the Clock, and he legendarily tore up the sheet music twice.
Yeah, well, he denied that. He denied it in an interview. It wasn't so much that he hated the song at all. Dave Miller, I think, does deserve credit for being actually quite visionary. I mean, Dave Miller was the guy who down in Virginia listened to this guy talking about this Rocket 88 and came back and made the record. But Dave Miller did have a personal problem with an individual by the name of James Myers, or Jimmy Myers, also known as Jimmy DeKnight, who is, I guess, legally a co-writer of Rock Around the Clock. Now, Myers later admitted in a deposition that he did not actually write the song, but he paid $500 to Max Friedman, who actually wrote the tune, to get his name put on it. But anyway, Myers was involved in my father's life from the Cowboy days. Myers was a co-owner of Cowboy Records that my father recorded in 1948 and 49, and Myers put money for some demos and masters, and Myers actually was the man who negotiated the record contract with Decca Records, which led to Rock Around the Clock, Shake, Rattle, and Roll. So Myers deserves some recognition, but he also way overstated his involvement to the point where most people dismiss him because he made up so many stories. It's hard to distinguish, what's true and what's not with what he said. So anyway, to answer your question, Miller did not like Jimmy Myers. And there's probably more to it than we know. Probably money was involved in a business deal of some sort. And of course, Myers, I guess, while Dave Miller, who had my father under contract with ESSA Records, while Dave Miller was in Europe, when Myers negotiated a deal with Decca and got my father off the label. So there was between them, and I think for that reason, Dave Miller did not want my father to record Rock Around the Clock, just because Jimmy Myers would have made money on it.
Oh, okay. So it was
so that was the first tune that they did. And interestingly, I'll just add this. So because Jimmy Myers negotiated the deal with Decca, what he got out of that deal was there was an agreement that the first two records that they made, that the B-side of those first two records would be tunes published by Myers. So the first record they made was called 13 Women and Only One Man in Town. That was the A-side, and that was the record that Decca wanted my father to make. On the B-side, you got to put a Myers tune. That's where Rock Around the Clock ended up. So when it was initially released, it was released as 13 Women and Only One Man in Town. That was the A-side. And like I said, it charted, I think, went 26th for the first month, and then it dropped off the charts. So it ended up getting re-released a year later when it was on the movie soundtrack. And there's a story behind that if you want to hear it. It's basically when the movie was being made, Glenn Ford was the star of the movie. And his son Peter was a fan of Bill Haley and the Saddlemen, Bill Haley in the comics. And he bought 13 Women but didn't really like it. But he flipped it over. He was playing Rock Around the Clock all the time. So when the producer of Blackboard Jungle, Richard Brooks, was over at Glenn Ford's house talking over the script, he mentioned they were going to need a song to put on the soundtrack of the movie. And Glenn Ford said, well, my son Peter's a big music fan. Let's go check out his record collection. And there was Rock Around the Clock. And That was one of 3 records they considered, and Rock Around the Clock ended up being the choice. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, once it came out in the movie, it was re-released and became the very first #1 record in rock. That record has a very twisted, interesting story. Kind of, there's a million reasons why it never should have been a hit. Dave Miller didn't like it, tried to get rid of it. Jimmy Myers, managed to get it squeaked onto the B-side of a record. It was released, it didn't hit. Mm-hmm. And some 13-year-old kid happened to like it, and his father happened to be an actor in a movie about juvenile delinquency. All that had to happen in order for actually that to be the record that kind of opened the floodgates of rock and roll.
Yeah, I mean, your father, no doubt, brought rock and roll into the public consciousness with that song. I mean, it was such a huge phenomenon. And it's funny, too, is that, even after his popularity had waned after many years, right, he got a resurgence with that song when it was in American Graffiti in the first season of Happy Days. I mean, it was just
absolutely right.
It was just an amazing...
A whole new generation, that's right.
Yeah.
And when that happened, I mean, there was a kind of a resurgence or a revival of interest in 50s rock and roll. Richard Nader actually put on these major arena tours with 50s bands. Mm-hmm. And Rock Around the Clock, as you mentioned, charted again in the U.S., and I think it entered the top 20 in the U.K. in the late 60s, early 70s, and around the world. It continued to chart several times. Yeah, it's one of the, I don't know if this is absolutely current now, but the last I had checked, Rock Around the Clock was still the third best-selling single of all time in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Wow.
The one being White Christmas by Bing Crosby. Mm-hmm. Number 2 being Elton John's second version of Candle in the Wind when Princess Diana died.
Yeah.
And so Rock Around the Clock is number 3. So, it's one of those songs that just had many lives, and it's probably playing somewhere right now as we speak, somewhere in the world.
Wow, God, yeah, I know, it's an amazing phenomenon. And then his follow-up hit, of course, was Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which is my personal favorite of all his songs and stuff. I was singing it in karaoke one time. I never really quite noticed this before. The lyrics are kind of sexist by today's standards because he's telling the woman to shut up and cook dinner. It's kind of like Ralph Cramden telling Alice to do that on The Honeymooners.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it's actually those lyrics are actually cleaned up version of the original that was done by Big Joe Turner. It was written by Charles Calhoun, but Big Joe Turner's original version, a lot of those lyrics had heavy sexual innuendo as well. My father changed the words on some of those, but you're right. Even the cleaned up lyrics, still by today's standards, right, would raise some eyebrows or draw some criticism, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. It's a great song, and then of course, "Burn That Candle" is great. See you later, alligator, which has become a national catchphrase to this day.
Yep.
And of course, "Hot Dog Buddy Buddy," which he performed in the movie "Don't Knock the Rock," which was a sequel to the Rock Around the Clock movie. Did he like being in those movies?
Oh yeah, well it's a great ego massage. He didn't think much of his acting. Of course, he only got a few lines, but and obviously it was great exposure for the band. But interestingly, my father really kind of always got in his own way with a lot of things. He resisted opportunities, but often got talked into them. So, for instance, we mentioned, I did a whole story about how Rock Around the Clock, the record, got on the soundtrack of the movie Blackboard Jungle. Mm-hmm. So I remember my mother telling me when I interviewed her for my book, they were down in the den of our home called Melody Manor there in Boothwyn, right outside of Chester, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And my father was just singing to my mother on his acoustic guitar. She described him as, just happy as a sunflower, singing to an audience of one. And the phone rang, and it was, Lord Jim Ferguson, my dad's manager. And my dad hung up the phone. My mom asked him, what was that? And she goes, oh, it was Lord Jim. Something about they want to use my song "Rock Around the Clock" on some movie about a jungle or something. I don't think I want to do it. I don't want to be overexposed. And then you're doing it. And of course, they did.
Yeah.
of his life. But his first inclination was, no, I don't want to be overexposed. And there's other stories. He'd done a TV show, like the I Love Lucy show.
Yeah.
Des Yarnet's Productions. They were in negotiations. They wanted him to do a show, but for some silly reason, he just nixed the idea and lost that opportunity. And many examples like that. So it's crazy. It's crazy. He could have had so many other successful outcomes, but he kind of just was his own worst enemy in many ways.
Yeah, it seems to me like he was all about the music and not about the fame or the glory in some respects.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the book, I kind of try to illustrate this. And my father he grew up being really kind of put on a pedestal by his mother, adored by his parents, encouraged, supported, and told he was great. And he always had some kind of certain insecurity, maybe related to his blindness in one eye, perhaps. Maybe something a little bit more in terms of his personality and anxiety, social anxiety, and that kind of thing. But he always had to have one close friend near him, and he was very shy about being in crowds and meeting strangers. And it was hard to get him to go to any kind of press parties or to come out of the dressing room to meet people. Of course, once he did, he was fine. But I think the way he was brought up, and then to have the success that he had, it has to play with your mind a little bit, I would think. And I mean, anybody would feel good to be, told you're great by everybody around you constantly, and to have financial success and the popularity that he had. The only problem was that he lost it. It had to go on, and he did. But I mean, I think he struggled with that his entire life, which may most likely have been a contributing factor or a major factor in his turn to alcohol.
Mm-hmm. And was he friends with a lot of his contemporaries?
Oh yeah. He always spoke, highly of his fellow rock and roll pioneers, and was very supportive. And I haven't heard any really bad stories in terms of his relationships. Now, a lot of them were quite egotistical, and so there were, arguments about who would get to close the show on Richard Nader's, revival tours in Wembley Stadium in England when they played in '68. So there were some clashes there, but I think my father really kind of respected his contemporaries, and I know some of my conversations were difficult. I did try to kind of ask him about those kind of things, and he always said kind words, good words, and positive words. And about Elvis in particular, because people assume, probably rightfully so, that my father had some resentment for Elvis, because really, my father was the original king of rock and roll. In 1954 to early 56, he still was, but really starting in 56 and really mid 56 on, Elvis just started knocking him out of the off the top in terms of the hits. And then of course, just in terms of the charisma, sex appeal, popularity, Elvis became the king of rock and roll. And then of course later generations just assumed Elvis created rock and roll. So people assumed that my father resented that, but I don't think he did. I think he always described Elvis to me as a polite young man who with a good heart and a lot of talent, a tremendous amount of talent. So no, I think my father really had great relationships with all the other rock and roll pioneers.
Yeah, I heard he had a good relationship with Buddy Holly.
Yeah, well, Buddy came on the Decca label, which my father was on, but I think by then Decca had a different idea of recording studios somewhere else where Buddy might have recorded. But I know they knew each other, they crossed paths. I don't know any really specific personal stories though, but I know they were contemporaries and they did interact. And of course, once again, my father spoke very highly of him and all his contemporaries.
Mm-hmm. Have you met a lot of, and I imagine you have met a lot of rock legends in their own right of the last 30 or 40 years who credit your father as an influence?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say I've met a lot, and I really haven't been out there trying to do that. But I have, I guess I have met some on some shows. And yes, yeah, it is amazing how they, I mean, they know, and especially actually in England in particular, probably all of Europe. I think it's just because of the, the culture. They have a greater appreciation in general for history, and so absolutely, anybody who I do meet related in the industry always has to let me know how much they respect what my father did and all that, and they know it. And here in the U.S., not so much. I think he's somewhat overlooked and forgotten. Except, real musicians, of course, know their music history. But I think he is somewhat overlooked in the U.S. And, of course, a lot of time has gone by. So, I mean, his career was relatively short here. But, of course, he went on. I mean, after he left the United States, he went on to become the largest selling artist in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Years. And then, Europe, I mean, he had a record deal with Sonic Records in Sweden throughout the 70s, late 60s and 70s. So he continued touring and being quite popular around most of the world. But in the U.S., largely forgotten, except for, as you mentioned, when Graffiti and Happy Days went out.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that nobody has really tried to make a movie about his life like so many of his contemporaries?
Well, I'm very hopeful that my book will become a movie. I mean, we have sold the rights to a legitimate producer, but I haven't heard any more than that at this point, so I don't know if a movie will actually be made. I know it will be a fantastic movie, particularly with the personal insights that I offered in my book, and relationship with my mother is quite a story there in itself. Very cinematic, and I kind of wrote the book visualizing it as a movie. So I'm hopeful one will be made. Why hasn't one been made yet? I think there's a couple of reasons. Maybe there wasn't enough information there. My father was very, very private about his personal life. Mm-hmm. So my book just came out, and prior to that, there had been one other book written by my half-brother, Jack, my older brother, but it really didn't go into his personal life. And there was another very brief biography that came out right after my father died by John Swenson called Bill Haley, the Daddy of Rock and Roll. But once again, not enough there for a movie. So I think now there's enough, and hopefully I have it in the hands of the right person. Mm-hmm. I was contacted by another professional script writer who asked me the same question: why isn't this a movie? And I told him what was going on. And when I told him who the producer was, he said, "Oh my gosh, I went to American Film Institute with him, and he's the real deal." So I'm very optimistic that the movie will come out, and I think it is. I mean, that's all of the elements that you would look for and more in a movie this type. Meaning, it has the crowd scenes, and it has all the interesting historical context. It has the race, and then a really kind of very interesting personal study of what fame can do, mm-hmm. and rags to riches to basically self-destruction through alcohol. I mean, just so many ups and downs and dramatic extremes. It would be a fantastic movie. It's filled with great music and live performances, and yeah. I mean, there's no reason on earth it shouldn't be a great movie, and so I'm just hoping it happens.
I hope so too. Rumor has it that Little Richard okayed a movie about his life just before he died. So if that gets made, that could be a good boost for your father's movie.
Oh yeah. Well, there's definitely precedents. I mean, there've been a number of these. I mean, I think the movie on Johnny Cash was excellent.
Oh yeah.
Some of the earlier ones, there was one of Richie Valens and Buddy Holly. I mean, they were pretty good. The music was good. So there's definitely a precedent for doing this. Even recently with Bohemian Rhapsody and the Elton John movie. I mean, it's a tried and true formula for Hollywood. So Um, you still have to get a studio interested in somebody to put up the big bucks to make it happen. So, but I agree with you. I don't see any reason on earth why this wouldn't be a fantastic movie, and I think it's just a matter of time before it actually happens.
Yeah, we also need a Chuck Berry movie too. That's long overdue. Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, all of them. Yeah, I mean, it was such a exciting time in American culture. That mid '50s when everything kind of changed from the conservative '50s to the post-war boom to what to the of course the '60s. But that in between period was just so interesting and so creative, particularly with the popular music end. So any one of those artists would lend themselves to a great movie, I would think.
Mm-hmm. So what made you what made you decide to write this book, and how long did it take?
It really 40 years, where do I start with this? I'll try to be brief. So
Okay.
I kind of alluded a little bit to the dysfunction on the family side of things. So basically, my father abandoned our family, and it really left us in a pretty difficult place. And then beyond that, he did not support us financially or stay in touch really, and he descended into alcoholism. So my resentment for that, I had very strong resentment about that. And then, of course, carrying his name and kind of constantly being reminded of it, I had to work through some psychological issues. So part of the way I had to work through that was to learn as much as I could about my father. So this really started just as a research project, as a term paper in college, to learn as much as I could about my father.
Mm-hmm.
And so that continued throughout my life, off and on. I think with the ultimate goal to write a book. But it was extremely challenging because my father was very private and personal and secretive, so there wasn't really a lot out there. And so I really had to track down people who knew him and interview them extensively. And I was fortunate. I did have the opportunity to talk to many of the musicians who he played with over the years and record the interviews. And then, of course, my mother was a great resource, having been married to him really from the beginning of his fame till the end of it here. And then one of his business managers had a tremendous amount of material and information on the business side of things. So he gave me about 20 hours worth of interviews. And so it was just over the years, I took my opportunities to interview people and do more and more research. And then I started forming my father's music and touring a little bit. I started getting some press over in the UK, and a literary agent in New York read an article about me in a UK rock and roll magazine and contacted me and said, would I be interested in writing a book about my father? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm about 90% done one.
Mm-hmm.
So he loved what I wrote, but of course what I wrote was way more than let's put it this way, it wasn't publication ready. So it was about 150,000 words, and so he got me a book contract for 80,000 words, and paired me up with a writer he had worked with, named Peter Benjaminson, who had written a number of books about Motown artists. Mm-hmm. So Peter took my 150,000 words and chopped it up and rearranged it, got it down to 80,000, and we went back and forth, and voila, there you go. There's the book, and it finally came out. We got actually published it here in North America with Backbeat Books, and also in the UK with Omnibus Books, and they also have the global rights. So got it with the right publishers that have shelf space in the brick and mortar stores, and of course it's on Amazon. So it took a while to, number one, research it, write it, get it to a point where it's ready for publication, and then get it in the hands of the right publishers who could distribute it properly. So it's been a lifelong project. But I guess to answer your initial question, it was really more as a
Wow, that's beautiful. I'm glad you got that closure, because now you have your when quarantine's not happening, you're touring with your version of the Comets and all that stuff. Have you toured all over the world?
Well, we did get to New Zealand, which is really as far away as you can get from where I'm at in Philadelphia. And I've been to Germany and UK, but basically the band is just around the contiguous 48 states. A lot in mainly senior communities over here, but a lot in the Northeast and also in Florida and actually the whole East Coast, quite a bit in Texas, and we've done some, not too much on the West Coast. We've been to San Diego a few times, a lot of the Midwest. So the audience for this is now they're getting older and older, and so I'm not sure the future for this band unless or the interest in this music period unless a movie comes out, and I think then we'll have another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But I think our opportunities are dwindling now because the audiences just aren't what they used to be for this music. But just kind of to tie that into what we were speaking about previously, having had this opportunity to travel around and perform my father's music, and incidentally, when I do it, I kind of make it a rock and roll history show. So I sing my father's songs, but I tell stories between the songs, and usually use it with a PowerPoint presentation of a couple of hundred photographs. So we would kind of make it a kind of an interactive storytelling session as well as a live musical performance. But the point I want to get to is after the show, we go and meet the audience, and I didn't really anticipate this, but almost everybody obviously thank us, love the show, and so on and so forth. But so many people tell me stories of where they first heard my father's music, or when they saw my father, or what the record meant to them, and just the joy that they have or derived from the music that they share with me is just an incredible bonus I never anticipated to doing all of this. And in terms of this being cathartic or therapeutic for me to confront my issues, well, I never anticipated this benefit. It really was quite magical. The feeling, even though my father was in some ways failed me, in other ways he gave me a great gift. What he did and the love that people have, the joy that he brought to people, that they now turn around and share with me. It's just an incredible bonus I never anticipated.
Yeah, I bet. Did your father have any songs that he was especially proud of?
Well, I'm sure. I mean, I'd just be speculating like anyone else, but certainly if I was him, I'm sure he would be proud of Crazy Man Crazy, which really was a groundbreaking, innovative song for the time. I mean, and it changed everything. That song and the popularity of that song was the reason that Decca Records was kind of interested in him and signed him. So most certainly, I'm sure he's proud of that. But also I know from all the interviews I did, people I spoke to, and particularly my mother, that at heart my father always just loved the pure, simple country, hillbilly, and western music, and he always went back to that. He always tried to go back to that. He always tried to cover country tunes and mix some of them on his later records. So I think I wouldn't, rather than say one specific song, I'd say he had great affinity, great love, great fondness for a pure country style of music that he played so much in his childhood and his young years. And the rock and roll thing, he couldn't get away from it, so he just embraced it. I think once he was quoted as saying "Rock Around the Clock" was like a little piece of gold he carried around in his back pocket, and no matter how bad things were, how bad a show went, he knew we could pull out that song and everybody would go home happy. So obviously that one had a special place in his heart as well.
Oh, nice. And, when he was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame posthumously in 1987, were you there?
I was not there at that time, and I don't recall if I was even given an opportunity to be there. But at that time, I may have refused it if I had been given the opportunity. I was still kind of stuck in my, I don't, I want to create my own identity. I don't want to have anything to do with my father's public image.
Mm-hmm.
So I would miss that then. However, in 2014, I think it was, my father's original band, the Comets,
Mm-hmm.
the band members were inducted. It was 2012. I'm sorry, 2012. They were inducted, and I was there for that. So those guys who were in the original Saddlemen and the Comets, they got back together as a band in the 1980s, and then toured quite a bit. So I actually performed with them on stage before taking the leap in creating my own band and doing this. So I did go, of course, to support them in 2012 when they were inducted. And that was a fun experience. It really was.
Wow. Well, Bill, you've survived an awful lot, and your father has left an incredible legacy. And I thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Tommy, and I enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you, sir. And I hope after quarantine ends, you can get back on the road, and hopefully that movie will be made in the future. And I will keep an eye out for that.
Excellent. Very good. I'll shoot you an email if I get any word on the movie. You can help get the word out there.
Awesome. I sure will. You have yourself a great day.
All right. Take care, Tommy.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Bill Haley Jr. Ain't he a cool dude? Nice guy. I like him a lot, and very humble, and he's gotten closure of everything that happened with his father in the past, and he even recognizes his father's genius, and that's really great. I'm glad I got to talk to him. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes. See you later, alligator. After a while, crocodile. See you later, alligator. After a while, crocodile.